line. Bad bitches, every city in my tribe. Look behind. Booty dominate.
Hello, Kenzie, Will. Um,
Hello.
yeah, so I came like at the last minute of that last conversation. I don't know what happened to our account, but um I would say um so to continue off of that conversation, would you say that that gender is a social construct?
Yes.
So then I have a question. How how can people be born with a disposition to a social construct? So this is the struggle that I have to like in regards to the fact that the way I view it, and I think it's impossible to view it any other way, is that people conform to social constructs. That's the point of social constructs, is that people conform to them. And so if gender is a social construct, then how can someone be born with a disposition to a social construct that they haven't been exposed to? And not only that, but we see this like in like different parts of the world. Like you don't see a trend of people in the middle of Angola or in countries in Africa or in like developing countries around the world. You don't see this trend of people becoming trans. So the way I see it is that if this is the case, then people conform to this ideology. It's not something that they're necessarily like, well, obviously people are born more androgynous. People are more born with like a disposition to certain gender expressions. But I think that especially now in today's world, I think people are conforming to this ideology rather than actually being born with it in their heads. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Because this gender
Yeah,
dysphoria
but
trend,
I disagree with you that people are just like innately born with this predilection to go to a gendered construction. I think they are persuaded and influenced to do so.
can you repeat that? So you're saying that like people
Yes,
born
if
as
within
men?
society men predominantly wore dresses, I think we would see men and boys predominantly wear dresses, like we did within Roman times.
Well, actually, I think that helps my point, if anything, because then that means that people do conform. So, like, for example, right? Um, if the
Then
tr
you just see how gender is a social construction.
no, no,
Because
no,
do
yeah, yeah,
you wear a dress?
no, I don't. But I'm saying, like,
Why
in
not?
regards to because I go with the I men don't wear dresses. But what I'm trying to
Wait,
say
wait,
is,
wait. Can men wear dresses?
do they have the ability to? Of course.
Yeah. Would it make them any less male?
No, it wouldn't,
Then why don't they wear dresses?
because they don't socially conform. The dresses are stereotypically uh like a thing that women wear. So
Right. So this is a social expression of your gender.
no,
It
I
is
agree.
not
Yeah, I agree with
great.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. But I'm saying like in regards to like imagine a world hypothetically, Kenzie, like where people just didn't had no idea about um the trans ideology, right? Like pretend like the concept of switching genders just didn't exist in the world. Do you think
Well,
that the
I don't
same
think trans
trend would
people
be observed?
switch genders.
What do you say?
I don't think trans people switch genders.
Isn't that the whole point? Like, what do you mean?
No, I think they can like affirm what their gender has always been.
From what their gender has always. I mean, okay, but like, I mean, that's the what they're affirming is something that they're not like biologically. So what I'm trying to say is like, obviously, it's a switch by definition. That's why they're called trans because like, you know, they're switching. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
It's switching.
But
Sorry, it's not. That's not why they're called that. They're switching from what they were assigned at birth to what they are and identify as. Right. So I would say the gender that you are is the thing that you identify as, but what you're switching from is what everyone else perceives you as. So what you were assigned at birth is what others perceive you as, and you're trying to transition that. But that's not what your gender is. Your gender is your identity and what you consider yourself. So no. Also, your whole argument rests on the idea that transgender people or mixed gender people or third gender people haven't existed always in humanity. when by and large in a gendered society they have in most indigenous or in most like many much older cultures they have these concepts. They just look different because this.
That's, I mean, yeah, but I don't think that deconstructs my argument because of the idea that like if gender is a social construct, then that means that people are technically just conforming to the idea of being another gender. So in that case, right, if the idea of conforming to another gender just didn't exist in society, then people wouldn't conform to that idea in the trends that we observe, especially in America, where we don't see that same kind of trend in like developing worlds. Like we don't see this kind of trend elsewhere, is
That's
what I'm trying to
because
say.
due to bigotry.
I would
Um,
disagree.
there's still
I wouldn't say
places.
it's due
Well,
to
do
bigotry.
you acknowledge that trans people experience more violence than cis people based on that aspect of their identity?
Yeah, I wouldn't I wouldn't disagree with that. Like I wouldn't mind like
Right.
agreeing with that as
So
well.
in other countries that are underdeveloped, there is a bigger sense of bigotry because of the idea that gender and sex are binary. If
But
you want an
so okay,
analogy, we
yeah.
can talk about we've seen, I hate to call it a trend, but we've seen this outcome in other areas as well, like with left-handedness. Uh, Previously in history, left-handed people were very much demonized. And then once left-handedness became socially acceptable, we saw an increase up to 14% of people then identified as left-handed.
Yes. So but the thing is, and what you're saying like is I guess it's just a theory, but I think that we can't just chalk it up to bigotry because I think that it's just the um it's sort of like sure, bigotry could unveil like inhibitions that people like. I guess that's your theory, but I'm trying to say that like even the idea of conforming to a social construct, if that social construct doesn't exist, wouldn't be observed in society the same way. If people were walking around just not thinking about the idea of switching genders, like that wasn't even an idea in within society, people wouldn't be conforming to that idea. Because if the whole game of the or not the game, but like
No,
if the whole
so
idea is that
again, no, I think you misphrased a lot of things there because we can see that trans people have existed throughout history. There were still trans people in the 90s when even homophobia was more prevalent. It's just now there is more acceptance within society to where it is safer for them to express their gender.
so in that case, Kenzie, do you think that um so you do you think that the same amount of people conforming to a different idea of gender would have uh how do I say this properly? Like, do you think that it's just because of that those same individuals would have lived their lives as just like straight male or female, but because of the unveiling of the gender norms, now they get to express trans. Like, for example, it's hard for me to believe, and I'll say it like this, like, well, what's a good example? Uh, Caitlyn Jenner, right? She lived her whole life as a man, Bruce Jenner, right? And then just suddenly, like in her 70s, thought that it was a good idea to switch. To me, that seems like just conforming to a social construct. I now I can't like look into her mind and like confirm this, right? But I think that there's a strong biological basis to gender, and if like and the idea that it's just a social construct and nothing else.
I
uh,
haven't said it's just like it is a social construct, but there are other influences which I would argue can be biological as well. And then to address your take on Caitlyn Jenner, she even talked about in the 80s when she started to transition, and even when she met Kris Jenner, that she had a what was perceived as a B cup, and then due to Kris Jenner not being a lesbian and them wanting to be in a romantic relationship, they stopped their transition. So I don't think it's, I think it's really sad that someone had to live a majority of their life not feeling good about the body that they were in. And when it comes to being transgender, again, I would prefer if someone who is transgender spoke on this, but like we can see within non-binary and transgender identities that there is still within a spectrum. There are some people who have gender dysphoria for where there is incongruence with the relationship between their mind and their body. There are others who just want to express maybe a more aspect of their gender and not necessarily need to conform to like femaleness or maleness. There are people who are non-binary who want to have an androgynous body. So I don't think it's as black and white as you're portraying it to be.
Well, I mean, that's fair, but I think it's also important to understand like why does the social construct of gender even exist and what is it for, right? So like if we look in like if we go back into history, right, and like why the social construct of male and female even developed, right? If we go away from like the conveniences of modern society and everything, life was a lot different between the sexes back then, right? So social expectations were built around those differences between men and women, and
That's
so it
actually not
evolved.
true.
What do you mean it's not true? Like what do you have?
It's not
Uh,
true in like a lot of the context that you're playing it in. Honestly, a lot of roles pre-modern society were not based on gender, but were based on skills
Yeah.
and
And I'd
ability.
actually say that the primary reason for the distinction, right, why it developed, is to spread a mythos so that men maintain supremacy and homogeneity. If you lie and pretend like women can't be leaders or anything, then it's a lot easier for men to be leaders, and that's what they wanted. And the reason that it ended up that way, right, was because we lived in a brute society where they could force that idea upon people, but that doesn't mean that the idea is true, justified, or has any place in modern society.
well, okay, I see that argument, but I would kind of disagree. I think it's because of the fact that like we sort of have a cultural response where we do things like we have social constructs around age, we have social constructs around childhood and adulthood, we have social constructs around uh, between the sexes. We have like the reason why I say I disagree is because the physical differences between the sexes manifested a lot more harshly back then than it does now. Because now, obviously, like with the comfort of modern society, we don't see it as much. So that's why it's sort of like we don't like understand that like that kind of phenomenon doesn't have a direct effect on our survival, right? But back then it certainly did. Like men were definitely stronger, more capable. They didn't expect women to like go to war and lead battles back then. Like obviously like
They did. They did, depending on the society. Like
expect
the
expect
escape.
them to do that.
Yes, yes. Like I said, it was not gendered roles. It was based on ability.
But Kenzie, like I mean, that's not how it manifested. Like I mean, I
It
get
absolutely did. If we look at human remains that have been found, there have been many remains found where they were buried next to sacrificial horses, buried next to weapons, and theorized to be great warriors.
okay,
The
okay, okay.
Scapian tribe, up to one-third of their warriors were women and girls because they fought on horseback and used bows and arrows. So there was no innate advantage to being male or female.
There may be uh exceptional cases like throughout like the world's history where
They're not
certain
exceptional
societies.
cases. These are very consistent. There was even research done this year that talked about how the hunter-gatherer male-female gender role is a myth.
The male
That
female
participated in big game hunting just as much as men. Again, it was based on ability.
Well, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not sure uh, what you're referring to. I'm gonna need some kind of evidence for that. But regardless, I think that like sure, you can point to specific time. Like, I think what you're pointing to is more of an exceptional case, because I don't think that the whole idea of, you're even like talking about the patriarchy here. The whole idea of the patriarchy is built on this idea that men were made to lead societies back then. So like, I think like this even defeats your own argument kind of, if you're going to make this argument. But I think that like, regardless of that fact, right? It's the idea
I
that,
literally feel you just said nothing there. What is your point?
no. My
What have I
point is that if
contradicted?
you're saying that it was based on ability and not based on sex, then
Yes.
doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of the patriarchy that you're trying to defend?
So just because there are gendered roles that men and women both participated in does not mean that there were historically that men have structured societies to where they are in a dominant position and have primary power. I would argue that the fundamental foundation of the patriarchy is that men use violence as their authority. And the patriarchy needs to rest on this idea that sex and gender are binary and that men are biologically supreme, which is why they should be in leadership positions, which is why they should be dominant and women should submit, which is why you have this lens of history that men had these roles and women had these roles, because it upholds this gender binary.
Well, then, Kenzie, then in that case, you're arguing for a patriarchy only in theory, but not in actuality throughout history. What you're saying is that people throughout history based certain roles purely on ability and not based on gender, right? Where I would argue that gender did have to do with ability, but that's besides the point. I would say that then that defeats the idea of an actualized patriarchy throughout
No, it
history,
doesn't.
because
Just
because you
because,
just said it was based on.
no. Just because we see a binary that has been created from the patriarchy not reflected in certain avenues of history does not mean that the patriarchy didn't exist. And I can show it in other ways that it was prevalent and existed, either with power positions, leadership positions. But this idea that men need to fulfill these roles and women need to fulfill these roles is not true. And men typically point to his story as like an appeal to tradition fallacy, that because this is how we've organized throughout history, this is how we ought to be, because these are wisdoms that humans have gained.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. But I think that, and sure, like, I guess in this regard, you can have like a sort of like view of how the patriarchy was constructed. I think the patriarchy manifested itself differently depending on the society we're talking about. And this is true like throughout history, not just now. Like, it manifested completely differently. But I think that the reason why I think that it went against your argument previously is just because you said it was based on ability and not gender. And I think that the
Yes,
patriarchy
in
is,
many tribes. Yes, it
yeah.
was based on ability and not gender. Where men and women would hunt together, they would gather together, and the elderly would watch children. Men
Yeah.
typically use this historical reference to justify men's contributions in one area and women's role in another area. And historically, that's just not true. I would argue that this construction is from the patriarchy because people have these preconceived notions that men did this and women did that. The Berta warrior, which was discovered next to two sacrificial horses surrounded by weapons, was thought for just around 100 years to be a man, until it was, and they wrote tons of papers on this warrior, how influential they were, how prestigious they were, how amazing they led their army. And then in 2017, through DNA testing, they were confirmed to be female. And now all of these people are like, well, no, we actually didn't mean it now that it's a woman. So even when people categorize bones because of social constructions of gender, they miscategorize their gender and sex.
I see. Will, did you want to say something? I know you were trying to cut me off and then.
Oh, I was, I mean, basically, I was just co-signing to what Kenzie said. It's really clear. Like, I don't think any sane person disputes that the patriarchy existed. Like, I don't know why you're trying to find, like, a flaw in one of those two propositions, because, like, literally everyone recognizes that the patriarchy existed. I guess the hypocrisy that, like, kind of failed to be pointed out, that you were attempting was that, like, we can recognize that there existed societies without a patriarchy, and then now we believe that they are. That's not contradictory, though, right? We can kind of look at like, you know, indigenous tribes or like historical separate civilizations as something like a clean slate, and then we can compare them to, like, I don't know, what happened in the West, where men primarily used force force women into submission. That doesn't mean that that's the natural position. That doesn't mean that that's the justified position. The narrative we're saying is that men, right, do have this slight physical advantage against women, use that slight physical advantage against women to force them into submission, and then justified that submission with the exact mythos that you're spreading, right, which is that that slight difference in biology makes them exponentially more skilled more skilled in any way, shape, or form, which just doesn't actually seem to be aligned with the truth. When we look at societies that don't force women into submission, we actually see much more equality of the genders. And then just finally, the modern civilization, right? Obviously, we don't care how strong someone is by and large now, right? Because we have these great things called machines. So the whole idea that any of this would matter in any way, shape, or form doesn't apply anymore, right? We're not living in a brutal world. We're living in a world where, you know, your strength is much, much less important. I'm going to be a lot more protected by someone with, you know, something that can shoot rather than something that can punch. So, you know, and women by and large are actually better marksmen, so I'll be more protected by them. So this whole entire thing actually is flipped on its head. So I don't see the relevance of this entire, like, within the modern world, at least.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't mind moving on from that topic. Actually, do you mind if we move on to the pro-choice argument? I would like to know.
Sure.
I would like to know, Kenzie, what your view, because I noticed that like people on the pro-choice side like they're not really a monolith, meaning like they hold different positions. And what I realize is like they either hold the position that like you can have an abortion up until, you know, right before pregnancy, right? And or they create like an arbitrary cutoff point to where abortion is no longer allowed. I wanted to know on like which of those two playing fields, or which of those two opinions you hold.
I don't think that people should be forced to sustain pregnancy against their will.
Same.
So basically, right up until pregnancy, right? In that
You mean
case,
birth?
yeah, right up. Right up until birth.
So if we're going to talk about termination of pregnancy, I think there are different ways that this can go about. Prior to 20 weeks, I really don't care how someone terminates pregnancy. In the event, like after 20 weeks, if there's a termination of pregnancy, I think obviously we can also prioritize the life of the fetus and do non-lethal terminations.
Oh, what a beautiful base take! Wow, the articulation of that, the words, same. I'm in the exact same camp.
So, a non-lethal termination. How would you can you specify what you mean? Do you mean like a C-section? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah,
or?
so it would either be an adduction abortion or a hysterotomy abortion.
Wait, but does the fetus die as a result of that process?
No, that's why it would be non-lethal termination.
Okay. Well, then that's okay. So that cutoff period, which you mentioned, what was it? Like 20 weeks, or what did
Yeah.
you say it was? 20
Yeah, I will
weeks.
say 20 weeks.
Why that as a cutoff?
I would say at that point, that's when the fetus can experience some level of harm through sentience and consciousness, where prior to that, they're just a body.
Okay, I see. I have a better frame of your position now. So basically, you're making like a sentience argument, right? So the fetus is.
Well, I'm making a bodily autonomy and sentience argument, because regardless of the fetus is a person or not, I don't think someone should be forced to sustain pregnancy against their will. But I do think there should be consideration to how this essentially disconnection between pregnant person and fetus occurs based on the fetus's, what I would consider personhood, if you will.
Well, okay. I think. Well, I'll tell you my position in response. Basically, I think the reality is that abortion isn't a complex issue. I think it's a very simple issue, but people complicate it. I view it as it's either a life or it isn't. And I know you're going to probably try to educate me on this, but I think it's that simple. So if it's a life, you can't kill it. If it's not a life, you can do whatever you want. That's the position. So then it becomes, how do we define life? And yada, yada. And we would progress from there. But I know through witnessing my mother's latest pregnancy that what's inside the womb is not just like a random piece of tissue. At the very least, if you don't believe that it's a life yet, it's certainly a potential human life. And that seems to be more valuable at your convenience, which I think is not a good way to frame the protection of human life. Because if we're just saying that like the worth of an individual life is based on convenience and whether the woman decides to choose, you're sort of like viewing it from a standpoint that you're basically deciding when life becomes worthy. And I think that's faulty thinking.
No, not at all, because I said that no one should be forced to sustain pregnancy against their will at any time.
Yeah. No. But I'm saying that, like, for example, right? If a woman decides that the growing fetus inside her body, like she wants to have it, suddenly it becomes a worthy life. But if she doesn't, then it's worthless.
Wait, yeah, but that's true like always. If I decide I want to give my kidney to someone, then they become worthy of my kidney. But if I decide I don't want to, they're not worthy of my kidney. I think it's like a grand way of saying it, right? But you're just describing like the idea of like me having choice over my body. And that's both me and Kenzie's position, which is like at no point is it anyone else's decision how the mother uses her body. Yeah. I also just want to note you're deciding, right, when life begins as well. Because like, I don't know, a sperm and an egg apart are also a potential life, but you're making a decision that I don't care about that. So we all have to make a decision about when life is. I just don't know why you don't own that.
Well, I would say that life beginning at conception is the more consistent position. I think anything else is just an
also deciding that. I just wanted to note that you're deciding that. Your argument can't conceivably be that like, well, we shouldn't decide it at all. We just have to make the right decision.
Well, there's a scientific decision, right? So like, for example, right? Like, I don't think, Will, do you deny that like at conception, there's a life? Like, for example, if like,
as well.
What'd you say? Oh, and let me respond, by the way. You mentioned like donating a kidney. I mean, a kidney is not. What did you say, Will? You cut off there. Oh, he left. I don't know where he went. But yeah, I wanted to say one thing, Kenzie, was that he brought up like the example of donating a kidney. I don't think that we can equivocate a kidney to an unborn fetus, because a fetus in and of itself is a unique human individual. It's not like...
He's not saying the kidney is the fetus. He's saying the kidney is the uterus.
Yeah, but he described it as like donating a kidney. Of course, no one can force you to donate a kidney.
Right. So in that analogy, the person who needs the kidney is the fetus, and the kidney is the uterus. So just like you can't force me to give you my kidney because you're in need. You can't force a pregnant person to give their uterus because a fetus is in need.
Yeah, but here's the difference, right? One scenario results in the ending, in the sure ending of a human life, whereas donating a kidney, that person can go to someone else to ask for a kidney, right? You're not obligated
necessarily.
To say that. I mean, hypothetically, sure, why not? Like,
well, like, because this was a court case that was decided in the 70s, McFall v. Shemp, that talked about this very premise. Because we can argue, too, that there are illnesses where there needs to be a very specific genetic match, as well as illnesses that can cause someone to have a time frame. People wait on organ donation lists for years and never find an organ and end up dying because of that. So the question is, if someone is able to help another person by donating their biological material, whether that is blood, bone marrow, an organ, do they have an obligation to if they do not consent to it? That's our distinction here, is that within the framework of rights, you have a right to life, but that does not include the use of anyone's body to sustain it.
Yes, but I think the problem is that there's a willful decision, right, on the mother's part to terminate the pregnancy, whereas the pregnancy, that is a natural disposition, right? So the baby is supposed to be there, whether, of course, whether.
I would disagree with that statement as well. How can you establish supposed to be?
I mean, how else does a fetus develop? That's the only place it can develop. There's no
Well, then
other.
by your logic, cancer is supposed to be there.
So by
And
your
therefore,
logic,
we shouldn't be able to terminate the
Kenzie,
cancer.
Kenzie, wait, sorry. There's a difference between an abnormality and a natural process, right? So if someone gets a disease, or if someone, like, technically,
That's not
yes, they're
abnormal.
supposed to get it. But what I'm trying to establish
Disease
is
is
that,
common. It's not abnormal.
yeah, I know. But I'm saying, like, abnormal from the standpoint that, like, it's like, it's stopping you from your normal bodily function. But what I'm trying to tell you is that,
I would argue pregnancy can do that as well. Pregnancy is not healthy in many scenarios.
it's also not typical. Most
Yeah,
people
but-
aren't pregnant.
I mean, but Kenzie, I could just say that abortion is not healthy for the unborn fetus as well. Like, the unborn fetus is
Well,
developing
but
just like
that's
any
not
other child
analogous
outside
to what we are saying, because you are saying that the fetus is supposed to be there. Therefore, you have an obligation to sustain it. So now we're making the argument, well, the cancer is supposed to be there because this is the only natural environment that the cancer can grow. So therefore, you have to sustain it even if it kills you. You can't remove it. That's the argument, is that because it's supposed to be there, you can't remove it.
But the difference, and I think this is a huge difference, is that the unborn fetus is not you, right? Or me, or, like, it's its own individual. It's not like, if we're going to stipulate that, like, removing a kidney or removing cancer is the same thing as killing an unborn
It's your
fetus, I don't
principle.
think that's
Wait,
equivocal.
it's your principle, though. Your principle is that it's because it's supposed to be there, you need to leave it there. So again, giving the fetus all these extra
Okay, sorry.
qualities.
That is not my main principle. My main
What is your
principle is that it's the termination of a human life. That's my main principle. So if
Well,
you're
you're
going to,
saying that someone has an obligation to sustain it because it's supposed to be there.
well, I mean, yes, yeah, why not? Because, well, okay, it's
So
supposed to
then
be
I
there
could
from the
say, then
standpoint
someone
that,
has an obligation to sustain cancer because it's supposed to be there.
yeah, but then again,
Or we
it's
could recognize the truth, which is that we have no reason to believe that it's supposed to be there. The only thing that would determine whether it's supposed to be there is if I want it to be there, or if there was some other moral imperative for it to be there, which there isn't.
Yeah, but I don't think that this is an equivalent argument because, again, like I said, one results in the termination of a human life. And I think that that's what you're ignoring. Is like, for example, right? If an unborn fetus were born outside of the womb, why does it suddenly make it impermissible for you to kill that child outside of the womb?
Well, we also substantiated to you that after 24 weeks, we think you shouldn't be able to kill the fetus in order to terminate pregnancy, that there should be a prioritization. So what the argument comes down to is, number one, do you have an obligation for someone to use your body against your will? Our answer is no. Number two, if there is already an established use of someone's body, how are you able to terminate that connection? And we're saying that when we establish personhood, there has to be a different way to terminate connection than prior to personhood.
Okay.
So it's not location, because again, even when they're inside the womb, if they're 24, 26, 30 weeks, we say you shouldn't be permissible to kill them.
Okay, so it's built off of autonomy. Well, in that case, I don't think that after 20 weeks, the autonomy is suddenly lifted. I think that even after that, the fetus is completely dependent upon the mother. For example, right? Even after it's born, it's completely dependent on the mother. So technically, you can make the same argument that the mother is not obliged to take care of the baby after it's born, or even after those 20 weeks, right? Because why does it stop at 20 weeks in that case?
I don't think
It's just a
you make
different-
that obligation, because you acknowledge that just because you give birth to someone, correct, that you don't have to take on parental responsibilities?
No, I would heavily disagree with that. I think that
So
either
you
that
so
or
you don't
they have
think
to
that
give it up.
parental obligations are transferable, so you don't believe in like adoption or
No,
safe
no, no.
haven laws?
Yes, but that would be on the burden of the mother to make sure that that happens. For example, right? If a mother were to just not take care of the baby or give it up for adoption, then in that case, I think that that's a moral obligation on the mother to do that.
I think that's a moral obligation on anybody.
Yeah, so we agree in that case. But
Right. So when we talk about moral obligations, sure, I think you and I can arbitrarily come upon which ones that we agree with. Even parental obligations, we can come up with ones that we agree with. What we don't agree with is that pregnancy or the use of your body against your will is not a parental obligation. So even if we come up with obligations, my argument would still be pregnancy falls outside of it. You are not obligated to sustain it.
yeah, but I think this idea that you just get to do whatever you want with your body isn't even a valid argument because, I mean, let's be honest, right? Uh,
I didn't say that either.
yeah, but
Yeah,
that's
that wasn't the argument.
no. But you're making the argument that you can't like, um, for example, right? First off, wait, I should probably address the previous point because I didn't even address that yet. The autonomy or the non-autonomous entity inside of the mother, right? The unborn fetus
Mhm.
doesn't this argument based on autonomy, I don't think deserves to be the basis on which we put the worth of a human life on. Because even outside of the womb, even like after the
argument.
20 weeks that you've described, the unborn fetus is still very, very, very much dependent on the mother. It doesn't, the dependency does not change at all. In fact, what you're trying to say is
It
that
very
like,
much change. It very much changes. Do you think that actually committing like physical labor versus using your body as life support are the same?
using your body as life support? Like
Yeah.
you mean like a brain dead person who's on life support? Or
No, so this is a common argument that I run into with pro-lifers is that they'll say uh, the same as taking care of a child and providing material caregiving resources is equal to being an incubator and providing biological resources as a form of life support. Are you saying that those are equal things?
uh no, I wouldn't say they're
Okay.
completely equal. No.
Well,
But
then what argument are you making? Because I'm confused.
no, I would say that no, I'm just trying to make the argument that the dependency of the unborn fetus doesn't change. Like you're trying to make the argument that like you can like cut up the like you can cut up the mother and take out the baby and it would be viable outside of the mother. Is that, if I'm correct, that's the argument you're making for the viability of the human life, meaning that at that point, that's when we decide that it's worthy to live, right? Essentially.
Well, can a fetus survive outside of the womb if it's not viable?
Okay. No, but what I'm trying to
Okay.
say is that
So
that shouldn't be the marker of like the fetus is still living regardless of whether it's
well,
viable outside of
even
the womb.
even if someone has a termination of pregnancy at 28 weeks, we go through an induction abortion, the pregnancy is terminated, but there wasn't a direct intent to kill the fetus, and the fetus still dies. I think the pregnant person is not liable for that.
Say that again. Sorry. I didn't hear that all the way.
There are instances that even though at 20 weeks I do give moral consideration to the fetus and how we perform the termination, if it still doesn't survive outside the womb, then there isn't much you can do. It's
Sure.
not necessarily about viability, because even though there is a higher likelihood of viability at 24, or excuse me, at 32, 35 weeks, it doesn't mean that that will happen.
Yeah, I get it. But I mean, regardless, right? Kenzie, why okay, in that case, why do you make the argument based on autonomy? Like what moral claim do you have to make that argument to begin with? Because, right?
That no one has rights to my body without my consent.
Yeah, but in that case, like, why doesn't that extrapolate to after the 20 weeks? because
It does. It
It
does.
does.
Which is why I say you can terminate pregnancy at any time.
yeah. But I'm saying like, right? Okay, in that case, right? After 20 weeks, do you think that all stages of development inside the womb develop at the same rate? Like, for example,
No.
right? Okay, so they don't, right? So 20
Right.
weeks is an arbitrary cutoff to begin with, anyways. So you're making,
Well, we typically view conscious and sentience around 24 to 28 weeks, and then I'm just employing the precautionary principle of 20 weeks. So, sure, I think any line we draw is arbitrary.
yeah. But the reason why I have a problem with that is that
Well,
the
your
the
line is
life,
arbitrary.
yeah, but I don't think that the essentially I don't think that the life of the unborn fetus changes at that moment, right? It doesn't just change because it becomes viable. The life is still a life
Well,
regardless. So what I'm trying,
it's
yeah,
conscious and sentience.
is consciousness.
And sentience, yes. Because when it comes to moral consideration of life, I don't have moral consideration for just human existence in terms of like our species. We value human conscious experience. And so at that time is when human consciousness come to an effect. So like I said earlier, prior to 20 weeks, you're just a body. After 20 weeks, there's what I would consider the element of you being human, a person, if you will.
Well, okay. I'll tell you my exception because I do have to go. I have a meeting soon at work, but I'm saying like regardless, I'm my distinction, and I would say that my distinction is that I believe that the right to life trumps any other right. For example, right? The right to your own body. Sure, cool. I can like I understand that that's a right, but I think that because the right to life is a precedent before any other right, meaning that you need the right to life before to build upon all your other rights, it means that it automatically trumps all those other rights because you wouldn't have any of those other rights
Then
if you
you
didn't have
should
the right to life.
agree that I should be able to take your blood or your bone marrow without your consent.
What? No, that's not what I said.
Why?
No, okay, I'll
Yeah,
tell
no,
you why
because
that's
my right
different.
to
No,
life
no,
would trump your body.
no, because right, there's a difference between an unborn fetus that has no other viable option to survive versus a human that's already living that has other options for survival. If you
If
are
there
the
are no other options, then do you think that we should be able to force people to give their blood, their bone marrow, their kidneys against their will?
if there's no other options, then morally speaking, why not? I wouldn't have a
Legally, we're
problem with
talking about the laws. Obviously, we're talking about the laws. What should the laws say?
that. Yeah, but let's be honest. You paint a scenario that doesn't exist because people do
It happens every day,
Yeah, like I told
probably
you
more than
about
10
McFall
times.
v. Shemp. McFall had a rare bone marrow disease that was going to kill him. He had family tested to see if anyone was a match. His first cousin Shimp was, and then Shimp decided not to donate. And so McFall
Yep.
sued through the court to try and get the court to force him to donate because without it, he would have died. The court ruled in Shimp's favor and said you don't have to donate, and McFall died because Shimp did not give him his bone marrow. I'm saying, should the court have ruled in favor of McFall and force Shimp to give him his bone marrow?
I'd probably say those are two different situations, but
How are they different?
because you're trying to extrapolate a situation where someone is already alive, right, and has a fully functioning, independent like life ahead of them. So that means that, but here we're talking about
But
the
they will die without their bodily uh, material, just like the fetus will die.
Yeah.
You're
Also,
just
don't you
special
think that the
pleading. You're
fetus
just
is
special
fully
pleading
alive?
for the fetus for no fundamental
Yeah.
reason. What?
Well, the fetus
yeah.
is also a life. Like, you're trying to draw a distinction between the two lives when you're saying they're equally valuable, equally determined, like equally deserving of rights. If they're equally deserving of rights, like, you need to justify why you're not giving the fetus extra rights.
Well, then it comes down to a matter of convenience, right? So I think that if there's no, I would actually argue that they should like I already argued this, that it's morally it's a moral obligation that if you're in the capability and if you're the only one
Yeah,
capable
but
to
we already
save a
told you
human
that
life,
that wasn't the
then
question.
yeah, but I don't make the laws.
So,
Neither do you, neither do I. But I'm
Or,
trying to
so
say,
we're
well,
asking
this
you
is
about
a
what you
legal
think the law should
discussion.
be.
I would actually argue that ideally the legality of something should correlate to like the morality of something, but obviously
Then
you're
just
trying
make
to
the
argue.
statement. Like, what do you think the law should be? Like, you understand the question. Like,
Yeah,
help
I
us
do.
understand your
I
answer.
would
Do
say
you think abortion should be illegal?
uh yes, except
Do
in
you think
very
it should
specific.
be
Well,
do you think it should be legally permissible to force someone to donate blood, bone marrow, so on and so forth?
Yeah, but Kenzie, I already described how like donating blood is a different situation because there are options available, but there are no options for the human fetus to survive.
We told you in this hypothetical there aren't options. We've
Yeah, but
already
see,
said this. Like your response.
this is why, Will, I
The
don't
thing,
like.
wait, no, you're gonna do the exact same defense. This happens every day. There are thousands of people waiting on waiting lists for stem cells, for things from bone marrow, right? For kidneys, for livers, right? And you need to be a genetic match. And very often we don't even find one genetic match. So very often we only find one genetic match. This is very, very common, especially with stem cells. And you know what's great about stem cells? The mother transfers stem cells through the umbilical cord to the child. So it's literally a one-to-one comparison.
Well,
Do you want to force the
I'll tell you
mother
why
to
it's
give
different.
stem cells through the umbilical cord to the fetus, but not to the baby? If so, like,
Yeah, I'll
what's the
tell you why
difference?
it's different because most of the time, right, the 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 difficulty in finding stem cells and finding like blood donors is the finding them part, right? So people typically don't find those individuals, but that's different than the relationship between an unborn fetus
Well,
and the mother.
we could easily change that and just make a law that everyone has to be tested every month. Or just you legally have to be tested to know what type of tissue, what type of blood, what type of bone marrow, and then essentially your information is put into a system, and then we know if who would match with whom. Like that's easily enforceable through law.
Yeah,
But
I mean
again, it would
that's a cool
rob
idea.
people's bodily autonomy, and people would be forced to use their body to keep other people alive, which is what you're for.
Yeah, I mean, I like that doesn't seem like a bad idea to me. If people can help others, why not? Like you're
You have
missing.
to acknowledge that in order to give someone aid, there has to be an element of consent. Because without our consent, against our will, it is torture. If you fundamentally think it is ethical to force someone to sustain pregnancy against their will, do you think it is ethical for people to force intercourse in order to have children?
No, I think that's a ridiculous argument. I'll be honest.
Why is force okay in terms of pregnancy and robbing someone of their autonomy? But why is it not okay in terms of intercourse?
Because the creation of a human life doesn't happen before intercourse.
The creation of human life can be from from intercourse.
Yeah, but
So if we're going to take the whole thing as a process, intercourse, pregnancy, birth, you're saying in phase 2, force is okay, but not in phase 1.
yeah, definitely not.
Why?
I think
Why?
because the creation of a human life happens after
So
uh
it is okay to force women to sustain pregnancy because they bring children into this world.
the problem. Okay, I'll tell you why I have
So
this.
it's okay
I'll
to
tell you
torture women so that children can be born.
the framing of this is really well, you're describing it as torture. I think you're framing it as you're trying to
It
frame it as negative
absolutely
as
is. To
possible.
make someone sustain pregnancy against their will is torture.
Yes, but if it results in the in the ending of a human life, I think that trumps, like I said, the right to life trumps any
So
other right.
you do justify torturing pregnant people in order for birth to occur.
No, it's not torture. Like the
It is. If
vast,
you are
vast.
forcing them to sustain pregnancy, that is torture.
The reason why I say it's not torture is because no mother that wants her child would describe it as torture. They signed
Because
up
there's
for.
consent. Because
Strong disagree, by
consent
the
is
way.
there.
Yes, and that's why I think that the framing of it is what makes it torture or not. So that's what I'm trying to tell you is that there's an objective reality and
No,
there's a subjective reality.
you think it's ethical that when someone does not consent to pregnancy, to force them to sustain it.
Yes, because otherwise it ends in the result of a human life being cut off.
Right. So the delineation that you just made is that no person who wants to be pregnant, who wants to have a child, would consider it torture. It's because it's not against their will.
Yeah, but Kenzie, then that means that the worth of a human life is purely based on convenience, purely
It's
based on
not.
whether you want the
It's not
child or not.
based on convenience. If we can put these into so many analogies where would it be ethical to torture these people so that other people live? And I think there are so many other instances that you would say intuitively no, which is why when we ask, is it permissible to force someone to give someone else a kidney, someone else bone marrow, someone else blood, and you still haven't said yes or no?
Here, okay, I'll give you a rationale. I mean,
I just want to know a yes or no.
what to what? To the example you just gave?
Yes. Yes. Should someone be forced to provide bone marrow, blood, a kidney against their will to someone else? You're muted.
Yeah, I got a call.
You're muted.
Hello?
Oh
Can you hear me?
no, that's so sad. We're gonna get. Oh, he's gonna have to hop down and hop back up. That's so unfortunate.
I sent you a DM.
On Discord?
Yeah. Hi, Belle. I love you.
Yep, I do. I do want to address that comment.
Okay.
Thank you for texting me about that. So when I said I can understand racism and sexism and not transphobia, what I meant is I can contextualize it within the hierarchy of power, right? So what I mean is the reason people are racist, right, at least within one context, is because it maintains power for their race, and selfish people want to do that. And the reason people are sexist is because it maintains power for their sex, right? And people want to do that. It doesn't mean that this is a good thing to do, right? Like I can understand, fascism as well as like a reaction of people in extraordinarily difficult times to make enemies and create horrendous structures. That doesn't mean that I co-sign it, right? We need to understand things in order to respond to them. What I meant by saying I don't really understand transphobia is I don't understand the benefit that being transphobic brings to a lot of people, right? It can kind of be contextualized within the same contextualization as misogyny, right? But then just be misogynistic. It's just a general anti-progressivist stance. And it doesn't have as much of a structural answer. I forgot that colloquially, to understand something is to like forgive something. Forgive me for forgetting that colloquial usage. It's not like, oh, I can understand racist. It's like, no, like I'm studying why people are bigoted so that I can respond to that bigotry. And that's really important. Is like, so I physically understand the reason that this person is this way. It's like I understand why people are, serial unalivers. I need to understand serial unalivers so I can address them if that was my job. So, yeah. Sorry for saying that colloquially, and I appreciate the space for correcting. I should have corrected earlier. Thank you, Kenzie. Thank you for the reminder.
Okay, great. No. Do you want to continue to talk to him? He re-requested.
I mean, he seemed chill. And I think
He has to go to a meeting anyway, so.
Yeah.
I don't think I did my foundation.
Sorry. Yeah. I have a meeting at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so I won't just waste a lot of your time. But I'll just say one thing and then I'll leave. But essentially, I would say like the pro-choice argument says, like, even though there's no doubt that you guys believe that the human fetus is indeed a life, that it doesn't make you waver or make you any less pro-choice. Now, to me, I think, all right, let's start thinking about the crazy assumption that just happened there. So I have no doubt about what I'm carrying is a human life, and yet I have not wavered one little mark away from this belief that it is the women's right to choose whether or not to terminate the life of this baby. Now, if you want to hear a rationale, I mean, here's the complicated reality of the pro-choice side. That means that all life is not equal, and that's a difficult thing to hear, because yet a fetus can be a human life without having the same rights as the woman in whose body it resides. She's the boss. Her life and what is right for her circumstances and her health should automatically trump the rights of the non-autonomous entity inside of her, always. But to me, I view that as problematic, and I say that who chooses
It
whose
doesn't
life?
that it trumps the right. It's that the fetus does not have that right to
Yeah,
use her
yeah,
body
and
without consent.
exactly,
I
and
also,
that's
yeah,
the distinction.
I also just want to make very clear that's not our argument. We're not saying it trumps the right. We're saying exactly it never had the right. I don't have the right to your body. It doesn't have the right to the mother's body, right? My rights are not contested when you use your body, right? Or when you don't give me my body. What needs to be justified on your side is not like the idea that my rights violate that. You need to justify an obligation from the mother to the fetus. Because if there is no obligation, her not giving her body is not against the rules.
Yeah, but I think that who chooses whose life has the most value and is the one with that power is the distinction, because that, to me, that sounds like, and you were given analogies too. I mean, to me, that sounds like the 3/5 compromise, to me, like where we decided that African Americans were only worth 3/5 of a person.
No. We are not
No
making a
one here is
personhood
suggesting
argument
that.
in terms of should
But
this person have an
by
obligation or
extension,
not. Because even when they have personhood, we argue they don't have an obligation to sustain pregnancy.
yeah, but like we can extrapolate that to the 3/5 compromise, because they viewed that the individuals who served on their land, and the land would be equivalent to the mother's body in this case, right?
No,
That they
I
were worth.
disagree.
No.
I disagree that making any
Hold on a second.
material object equivalent to someone's body is not analogous.
Wait. But why do you say object? What's the object here? The unborn fetus or the slave?
The land.
No. Yes. But I'm saying that that's how they viewed it. That's the same argument. It can be extrapolated because that
And
was
they
the
were
view.
wrong. That's the difference. And
Yes,
they
wait,
were wrong. And
but
also, that's not our argument.
I'm saying
Wait, there
that
are so
you're
many
wrong.
things here. We're not saying that the fetus is less valuable because it's within the mother's womb. No one here said that. No one here suggested it, right? And if you want to make a straight up, like, much more than tone deaf argument, right, about how that's comparable to one of the most shameful, or a quite shameful chapter of America's history, you can if you want, but it would be wrong. I'm not saying a fetus is less valuable because it's within a mother. I'm saying even if it's equally valuable, it doesn't. The mother doesn't have an obligation to it, right? And the mother doesn't owe it anything because of that. So, I mean, go on with the insanity that you were suggesting.
Well, okay, but I would still say that the right to life trumps any other right, because the right to life is
Then you would need to
predicated.
force blood transfusions. You would need to force stem cell transfusions. We've already addressed this.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
you
but-
don't want to force people to give stem cell
And this
transfusions,
is-
you don't believe that.
But this is where I make the distinction that the options available to those who are
We said
seeking
there were
those-
only options. You keep denying the reality.
Yeah,
This
no,
defense
the
doesn't actually work
reality
when you
is-
engage with reality.
Yeah, but Will, the reality is that in cases where people can't find those options, they typically have to find people who fit those options. That's different from people who
Right. And if they find someone who fits the option, should they force them to do it?
Yeah, but Kenzie, how do they find those people? Those people have to offer up themselves. You can't just like go around
Not
testing.
necessarily. I gave you the example of McFall v. Shemp, and Shemp changed his mind. Do you think that, let's say that I had a child and I lived outside of society, we lived in a cabin together, and then all of a sudden we couldn't find food? Would I be obligated to cut off parts of my skin intermittently and feed it to my child?
But Kenzie, that's not equivalent to
That
that's
is
such a
equivalent because you're telling me I need to provide for my child. That would be food. That would be resources. I can't find any within the region. Would I be forced to then start cutting off sections of my skin, which you would agree would be pain, would be torturous, and then feed it to my child because I have this obligation.
The reason why I don't believe these
That's a yes or a
hypothetical
no.
scenarios. No. I there's so many other
Just
options
give me
in
an
play
answer
before
and then
that.
tell me why it doesn't work.
No. Oh my lord. Because you tried to apply the marginal
Give me an
exceptional
answer
case.
first.
No,
Give me
no.
an answer first and then tell me why it doesn't work.
Okay. I believe that the mother is morally obligated, yes, to perform.
Legally.
Legally, I can't make that argument.
You're making an argument
you're
for
arguing
abortion legally.
Yes,
So
yes,
you
but I'll
can't.
tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because I don't believe that the exceptional marginal case that you're trying to paint applies to the wide, like, pregnancies happen all the time. They're commonplace, right? But the exceptional
Yeah,
marginal
and
It
most
case.
of
doesn't
them
matter.
end
We're
in
discussing the
non-abortion.
principles.
Oh, I have to accept. Sorry about this, guys, but I do have a work meeting. So this was a good discussion, but maybe another.
Yeah, sure.
Damn.
I'm so fucking cute, bitch.